Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Church of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the Star Christ Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 97 and we're covering Orientalium Ecclesiarum 2-4 on the need to protect all the rights in the church, right? So if you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican and frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we talked about how all rights are held in high esteem and many have ancient roots. Today we're going to talk about this idea of protecting rights, how the church is made up of different rights, which are of equal dignity, and they all need to be protected. This is a section or chapter. It's not numbered, and it's called The Individual Rights of the Church. It's the first one. It's like the first one after the preamble, but that's the name of the section here. So let's get straight into paragraph 2, which is going to be on the Catholic Church being made up of different rights, sharing the same faith. So there's going to be a distinction between rights, which are like liturgical practices, ways we exercise authority, etc., versus beliefs, and the sacraments. So we have the united authority of the Pope, we have the sacraments, we have the creed, right? Things like that. But let's read it. The Holy Catholic Church, which is the mystical body of Christ, is made up of the faithful who organically united in the Holy Spirit by the same faith, the same sacraments, and the same government, and who combined together into various groups that are held together by a hierarchy, form separate churches or rites. Between these there exists an admirable bond of union, such that the variety within the Church in no way harms its unity. Rather, it manifests it, for it is the mind of the Catholic Church that each individual church or rite should retain its traditions whole and entire, and likewise that it should adapt its ways of life to the different needs of times and places. So there we go, right? So that union, which I mentioned at the beginning, same creed, same sacraments, all united in the authority ultimately under the Pope, although they may have slight differences in how authority is exercised within them. And they have different rights, have this unity, right? So there's analogies we can use for this, right? So for example, in the Roman Catholic Church, we have different religious communities, right? So there's the Jesuits, there's the Dominicans, there's the Carthusians. Their life is different, but they're all religious life, right? So all these rights, they're different, but they're all Catholic rights. The same kind of idea you could think of in the U.S. We have, somebody from we have, the California beach bum, you have the Midwestern farm boy, you have, the New England businessmen, things like that, right? And they're all united, they're all Americans. Now, there's the way of life in different parts of the U.S. is a little different. Now, obviously, the rights are a little more beyond just religious communities or region of the U.S., but maybe that analogy will help some people. And so this is a variety of ways to adapt to the practices, to authority, and there is an importance of keeping the rights, but then to note that they can change a little bit based on circumstance. They're able to adapt for circumstances. So, paragraph 3 is on the equality of these rights. So and their union under the Pope. So let's read it. These individual churches, whether of the East or the West, although they differ somewhat among themselves in rite, to use the current phrase, that is, in liturgy, ecclesiastical discipline, and spiritual heritage, are nevertheless each as much as the others entrusted to the pastoral government of the Roman Pontiff. They are divinely appointed successor of St. Peter in primacy over the universal church. So they are consequently of equal dignity, so that none of them is superior to the others as regards to right, and they may enjoy the same rights and under the same obligations. Also in respect of preaching the gospel to the whole world, see Mark 16, under the guidance of the Roman Pontiff. So here, rite, R-I-T-E, it talks about the liturgy and the ecclesiastical traditions. Rite, R-I-G-H-T, is, rights and duties, like a right we have, like talking about the First Amendment, right to free speech, right to religion, things like that, right? Correct? I said right again, a third meaning for right is incorrect. Anyway, so we talked about the areas of difference, right? They have the liturgy, discipline, and the spiritual heritage. And so liturgy, we've talked about a bunch, discipline in just things like how they appoint bishops, things like that. And then spiritual heritage, right? So they have different methods of prayer. You have the idea of praying, the Jesus prayer hundreds of times a day, which is much more in the East than in the West. And I think those of us who are Roman Catholics can often gain spiritually from maybe not going deep and like super deep. I've done a lot of probably more study than the average person for sure in the last few years on this topic, but that spiritual heritage I think can help some Roman Catholics just look at reading some, spiritual book by an author or something like that out there. And that can help us, broaden our perspective and help our spiritual life. Now, all rites are united under the Pope. The Pope is also the head of the Roman Rite, so it gets a little complicated, but the Roman Rite is not superior, right? They're all of equal dignity, and we need to protect every single rite. That's one of the things that's getting into here. Every single rite deserves protection, even though there is kind of an oddity in that the head of one of the rites is also the head of the whole church. We don't want to make that so much so that the Roman Rite becomes the norm for all the other rites. So paragraph 4 has 3 subparagraphs, and so A is about how in each part of the world we need to protect the rights that exist, and we need, especially when they overlap, there needs to be cooperation about that. B is about the need to instruct about rights, and C is about converts keeping their own rights. A is by far the longest, probably longer than B and C combined, but let's read A. Means should be taken, therefore, in every part of the world for the protection and advancement of all the individual churches, and to this end, there should be established parishes and special hierarchy where the spiritual good of the faithful demands it. The hierarchs of the different individual churches with jurisdiction in one and the same territory should, by taking common counsel in regular meetings, strive to promote unity of action and with the common endeavor to sustain common tasks so as better to further the good of religion and to safeguard more effectively the ordered way of life of the clergy. Right, so this idea of protecting into different areas, and so we establish parishes of those rights. All over the U.S., we were talking about Father Shabbat. He was talking about specific areas where the Chaldeans are more common. They have Chaldean parishes, right? They're not just Roman Catholic parishes. You look at the same thing with, where I grew up, there's a lot of Ukrainian Catholic parishes. Why? Because there's tons of Ukrainians who moved to that part of the world. You look at other parts of it in the U.S. and Canada. I think this aspect of individual parishes and the aspect of needing meetings is really important in areas like the U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, etc., where you have a whole bunch of immigrants from these parts where these other rites are more common. Because there's the historical place of these rites, but then due to various wars and things, a lot of people from those areas have emigrated from there and have come to, the Western world. Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand have certain parts there. And so there is that need to promote it, right? There was the need even in the past where there's kind of borderlands, but the historical regions were pretty unified in general, as opposed to US where, a whole bunch of Catholic rites exist, right? I don't know exactly what ones there are here, but, I know that there's a Ukrainian one near here. I know that there's a Maronite one near here. I don't know if there's a Chaldean one near where I live, but we have multiple Catholic rites all here, just in the city, and things like that. So that's important. Now, we're going to read to B on the need to instruct about rites, so let's just read it. All clerics and those aspiring to sacred order should be instructed in the rites and especially in the practical norms that must be applied in interritual questions. The laity, too, should be taught as part of its catechetical education about rites and their rules. So we need to understand the rites, important for priests, things like, we mentioned with Father Shabbat, but the most important thing is about marriage, where an Eastern Rite Catholic needs to have the marriage overseen by a priest, whereas a Roman Catholic can have it overseen by a deacon. And that's super important, but then also just understanding and things like that. And even the laity. I think in a way, this paragraph is kind of meta for this discussion we're having right here, because very much by going over this document, you are getting instruction in the various rites and understanding the rules. So that is all we have to say about B. About 4C is talking about converts keeping their own rights. So if you convert from, say, Russian Orthodoxy, or, the Coptic, the Egyptian Coptic Church, you go into the Catholic rite that matches that, so you keep your liturgy. That's the basic idea, but let's read the text. Finally, each and every Catholic, as also the baptized of every non-Catholic church denomination who enters into the fullness of Catholic communion, must retain his own right wherever he is, must cherish it and observe it to the best of his ability. Without prejudice to the right, in special cases of persons, communities, or areas, to have recourse to the Apostolic See, which is the supreme judge of inter-church relations, will, acting itself or through other authorities, meet the needs of the occasion in an ecumenical spirit by the insurance of the opportune directives, decrees, or rescripts. Right, so this is important for those converts from Orthodoxy there. There are certain cases where they might be exceptions. The rite is passed through the father, so sometimes you'll have people who, even though their father was X or Y rite, they went to the rite of their mother for their whole childhood, whole brought up. And so even though technically they might be the right of their father, they're practically the right of their mother and things like that. And so the church can rule on that. I know, for example, in my own community, there's been a few, I can think of 2 or 3 off the top of my head who were of other rites and had to get permission from the Vatican to make profession in a community like my own, which is Roman Rite, because they were switching rites to do so. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast. You can donate to help StarCross produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one time, monthly, or join the StarCross Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to continue on with Orientalum Ecclesiarum 5-6 on preserving spiritual heritage. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which will provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information of the podcast, such as playlists and a reading plan.
Amen.